Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by CoachMe Plus. CoachMe Plus is the leader in athlete management software and a product that we've been lucky enough to implement here for over 2 years now. The product in and of itself is exactly what you need it to be, guys, with options ranging from being a workout provider, as in sending the workout directly to the student athletes' phones, to being a place where you can communicate with them and bring together multiple streams of data to be its own dashboard for you, your coaching staff, or the athletes. Or you can use what we've added to our menu of CoachMe Plus activities, and that's the Hydration Station, where all of this information that is provided is based off of research from the Corey Stringer Institute, where we're looking at weighing in versus weighing out and then providing optimal hydration strategies for the student athletes by them selecting through the menu and tapping on what they'll take home with them and what they're consuming prior to the next practice when all the numbers at the top are lined up green. It's something we've had really good success with and the kids have really bought in on. Just another great example of the awesome product that you can find at CoachMePlus.com. Guys, hop over to CoachMePlus.com today and check it out. It's a product I guarantee you won't be disappointed with. Hey everybody, if you enjoy the podcast and the content it provides, be sure to hop over and check out the community. The community is an exclusive members website that is just an extension of what we do here in July at the Central Virginia Sport Performance Seminar. What it is a combination of video lectures, a coach's corner with your Monday morning take-home information, and a forum where you can talk about anything and everything related to the field of strength and conditioning. In the community, you'll find content added each month from some of the top practitioners in the world, ranging from PhDs to high-level coaches, bringing you exactly what they're doing with their athletes or their research at the present moment. On top of that, an additional discussion by coaches bringing you that Monday morning information, things that you can add to your training program right away. Tying that in with the opportunity to discuss with coaches around the world in the forum on anything and everything from the topics addressed in these presentations to whatever you're seeing in your daily life as a coach. If this sounds like the right thing for you and your staff, go ahead and hop over to cvasps.com/community and try it out for 48 hours for just $1. If you like it, you're signed up, ready to roll, and you're jumping into all the great content added each month. If not, feel free to go ahead and cancel at any time. No questions asked. We're really excited about what we're building in the community and hope you are too. Go ahead and hop over to cvasps.com/community and check it out today. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today, guys, I am joined by the University of Louisville's Jason Dierking, and we are going to talk about evaluating athletes. Jason first gets into talking about how they actually set the tests up, what they're looking at, and how they actually quantify what each test or each evaluation they're looking at. We then get into how that actually drives training, the role of monitoring, and how different times of the year yield different responses to what those tests are when we're looking at the micro level with each athlete versus the macro level for the whole team. We then start talking a little bit about how going from field sports into the water, how that changes with the swimmers, and how different evaluations are used there, and really how it's all based on the coach's culture. This is a really awesome talk, guys. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Let's get right to it. And all right. Jason, thank you so much for being on with us today, man.
I'm excited, Jay. Thank you so much for the invite. I know it took a little while, but I'm excited to be on talking to you now.
Yeah, man. I'm really excited because we're going to get to talk about something that I think a lot of us need help with, and that's energy system development, conditioning, whatever we want to call it, and how we evaluate our student athletes. So how about you start with what you're doing out there at Louisville with it and how it's kind of been evolved and where you're going forward.
Yeah. Well, I think for us, starting back in the fall, summer, really, I work with men's soccer in particular, and I think team sports, conditioning, energy systems, we try to call it bioenergetics now, kind of get out of that energy systems mindset, and assessment is a huge starting point, and I think in it's an area where even at the collegiate level, there's a lot of room for still growth and development and understanding. I think I see still a lot of teams doing conditioning tests that you look out there and you see such a variety of conditioning tests when it comes to field sports, even the difference between when you look at men's soccer versus women's soccer. Same sport, same kind of demands, and they're testing completely different things. And you look out there and you see their fitness tests and you're kind of wondering what aspect or what metabolic quality are they really testing? It's hard to tell because it's all this variety of intervals or whatever. And they might be chosen because of, they've done it historically. They've seen other teams do it. And the results simply, at the end of the day, are kind of a pass-fail mindset. And but you can't really hone in and say, what is the metabolic quality that I'm actually testing? And so when you get all the results, really all you can do is kind of put your team in rank order, and it might tell you who's good at that test. But then when you actually train and then retest, what led to improvements or lack of improvements, and in what areas. So what we try to do is just really hone in on what metabolic qualities that you're actually trying to identify. And for us, it's really simple. It's anaerobic power, anaerobic capacity, and then aerobic power and aerobic capacity. And they all fall within one of those four areas. And aerobic power and capacity are pretty similar, really. So that's the starting point and we really have to define those parameters. What defines each of those metabolic qualities?
Okay, so let's go right into that. How do you define them? And then how do you evaluate them with the young men that you're working with?
Well, for our team sports, running-based sports, we want to try to focus on running-based tests. And so the parameters for anaerobic capacity are pretty simple. It's 1 to 5 seconds maximal effort, regardless of kind of what modality you're testing, a wind gate test on the bike, a vertical jump, or a linear sprint. And so for us, when we're looking at these qualities and we're looking at running-based modalities primarily. So we're looking at, for anaerobic power, 1 to 5 seconds maximal effort. That defines anaerobic power for us. And we want to measure it we're kind of going back and forth going between velocity and watts, looking at like power to weight, which I think is appropriate in contact sports. But when you're talking about maybe basketball, tennis, soccer, field hockey, lacrosse, I think velocity is probably a better measure because contact and power is maybe not as indicative of actual performance. And so when we're assessing, we want to look at velocity. So we break it down in meters per second. And so we get not just a time, we want an actual meters per second, a very, very consistent measure across the board. Then anaerobic capacity would be next. And that's, there's a lot more gray area in that. But our parameters for that are 30 to 60 seconds, again, of maximal effort. And if we do it in terms of, say, like a wind gate test, where I kind of go back to that because everybody kind of understands that. 30 seconds, peak power, maximal effort for 30 seconds, empty the anaerobic tank, so to speak. And so you get power output from the first 5 seconds as your peak anaerobic power, and you get your anaerobic capacity from the average power of the 30-second effort. So what we're trying to do is kind of mirror that within a running-based test. So if you go to Steve Magnus' Science of Running, he'll say, a typical anaerobic capacity test for a track and field distance runners, a 600-meter sprint, which is going to fall probably a little outside maybe that 60-second window for your elites even, but again, it's probably a little bit more applicable to that demographic. So when we're talking about our field sport athletes, we want to look at what is their average power or average velocity over that effort. What is maybe a fatigue index? Look at a protocol that allows us to kind of gauge fatigue rate. And then if we have the ability to even track lactate production, which would be a great measure of anaerobic energy production. So what we do is a repeated sprint test, which is 6 by 35 meters, linear fashion, and we give them a 10-second recovery in between repetitions. So we're trying to minimize that aerobic influence in the total effort. So 6 reps, we go down and back. We set up timers going in one direction, timers coming back in the other direction. So they have just really about a 10-meter deceleration window, and then they hop over a lane and they're set at the next start line to come back. So we minimize the rest period there, which makes the whole total effort more anaerobic in total. And so electronically timed, we get the 6 reps. We get indication of a sprint decrement by looking at what is your best rep, and then what is the average of the 6 reps. And then we look at the difference between what your theoretical best is, taking your best time times 6, and what the actual total sum of those times are. And so we get a sprint decrement, which we feel is a better measure than just simply subtracting your best from your worst. Because over 6 reps, you could have a really good sustained effort and then a really poor one on the last rep, or you could have a fairly steady decline over all 6. So sprint decrement is probably a little bit better measure of our fatigue index. And then we've done it before. If we have the ability to do a 3-minute or a 5-minute post-lactate draw, even better. And then lastly, our beep test is kind of our go-to aerobic measure, and that's just simply a graded exercise test looking at 1-minute stages to exhaustion. And so you could do various protocols on the treadmill, or obviously field-based is a little bit better way to go for us, a little bit more practical. So that kind of completes our profile. We have anaerobic power, anaerobic capacity, and aerobic capacity, and we put all of those in a profile to really look at where their strengths and weaknesses lie.
Okay. Now, like the beep test or one of the intermittent recoveries? Which
we
you prefer?
do endurance level 1 beep test.
Okay.
We haven't done the intermittent recovery, and I know people kind of like that from the intermittent aspect of that. Again, I think that we try to get away from the mindset of okay, soccer's, say, an interval-based sport. You run, you jog, you rest, you repeat. And so the fact that there's a break is not probably the best reasoning to say I want the intermittent over the endurance. We simply want a graded exercise test to exhaustion. Even though that intermittent is similar to that, we want to say we're testing a specific metabolic quality, and this is the way we're going to approach it.
100%. No, I love it, and I've always used the regular beep test too, and most people are like, well, the intermittent 1 or intermittent 2, and I'm like, well, what are you actually trying to find out? Like, we know like what we're trying to find out from this test, so that's why we do this test. Like,
right.
I don't buy a turkey if I want a hamburger. Like, this is what I want to do. So now
it doesn't change regardless of what sport you play. We're looking at what is the strength of the aerobic system.
100%, man. Yes, and I love that. So now you've run your battery of tests. You've got your spreadsheet out. You got all your information in front of you. What's next for Jason?
So what we look at is try to identify really where the strengths and weaknesses lie. So obviously rank order, looking at Z-scores and trying to put a percentage rank according to best times, historical best times, and rank within the team. And so if we kind of create this radar graph for all three measures, anaerobic power, anaerobic capacity, aerobic capacity, and we create this metabolic profile, and then we can really kind of objectively a good visual of kind of seeing where their strengths and their weaknesses lie, and then that ideally will guide us a little bit more in terms of where the strengths and weaknesses lie, like I said, and what maybe the focus needs to be, but then working in conjunction with the coaches to kind of say, hey, what is obviously positional, what is the demands of the position and the sport require, and then kind of laying out guidelines to say, if we've got a kid, for example, at say a 50, if you're familiar with the endurance beep test, if you got a kid running a 15.6 on the beep test, but we see anaerobic power, poor anaerobic power, poor average anaerobic capacity. Well, I think the mindset a lot of times is to say, okay, well, the next time out, your goal is to beat your previous time. And that's kind of the standard, or, we're looking for across the board. Whether, you're looking at a men's soccer team where you got some kid running a 12, a 13, up to a 15. Are you expecting the same rate of improvement or whatever from all kids? Well, this allows us to kind of say, listen, we've got our kind of our minimum standard. We've got our performance, our metabolic profile says that this kid is as fit as we need him to be in the aerobic capacity. So now we really don't need to focus on that. And if we give up a little bit, if he actually decreases a little bit of that at the expense of improving his anaerobic capacity or power, that's probably a pretty good trade-off. So it allows us to kind of say objectively, we don't need this kid to necessarily improve or even maintain. He's overfit. He's as fit aerobically as he needs to be to perform at the level we need him to for 90 minutes. Now let's focus on, another area, strength, anaerobic power, anaerobic capacity.
So you have, you break this into buckets, like you put guys into groups. Do you have it set so that like each specific student athlete is now prescribed something specifically? Like how does that work for you? Because I know that, just with scheduling and then sheer numbers, like that individual aspect can be difficult, especially when it's just you running the show.
Yeah, for sure. No, the grouping aspect is really how we go about it. In season now, it's a lot more management based on who's getting the minutes and who's not. And so, at some point we get into kids that are going to be redshirting, and then we can start to move more into kind of specific work for them more long term. But in season, it's all about management, and we're fortunate enough to have a full-time performance analytics position doing a lot of our data analytics for us. We use Catapult, we use Polar from the metabolic mechanical aspect of things. So we're really trying to manage acute to chronic ratios and stuff like that. So that's in season. Out of season, yeah, we focus a lot more on kind of the group aspect in terms of individualizing things. Early off season, we're really focused on developing good aerobic capacity. So a lot of the guys are doing a lot of the same type of things. And then as we get into that 20-hour period, our supplemental work is a little bit more individualized based on what the guys need. And, obviously kind of the expectations as far as supplemental stuff changes based on their needs.
How does the information that you receive from the people run? Well, first of all, are you running or pulling the data from either Catapult or Polar? And if you are, what are you looking at? And if not, how do you utilize that information that's being brought back to you?
We gather the information through Catapult, and so we capture the heart rate through Catapult, and so Yeah, so we're looking at daily and weekly loads handled by our data analysts on the field collecting that information and then putting it into team reports, and then making sure that obviously we're falling within kind of the weekly layout, looking at kind of a weekly budget in terms of load and distances and high speed metrics and things like that. And then kind of as we get into the season, it kind of flows. We look at, managing obviously, fitness to a point, but it's more about really handling recovery. And managing recovery properly. So I think if that answers your question.
No, yeah, 100%. So then when you get into the off season, are you still utilizing that technology, or is this more of time based versus outputs and physiological output based?
Well, we're limited a little bit in terms of numbers, but yeah, we off season, our in season teams have priority in terms of the technology, but we're pretty well outfitted to have everybody using this full time, even in the off season. So we're still managing both the mechanical and the metabolic aspects all through the year. I think we're probably maybe a little bit more metabolic focused in the off season, making sure that their fitness is improving as we need them to be, and primarily from a standpoint of not overtraining them too early in January and February if their season starts in September. And then in season, I think it's probably a little bit more the controlling the distances, the loads, the mechanical stress of the season.
No, awesome. That's awesome. 'Cause just listening to how you break down the tests, I could see how like looking at different metrics on Catapult would fit in like perfectly with that, and how different ways you could break down your trim score would fit perfect with that. Like
Mm-hmm.
either one or the other or both together, depending on which of those physical qualities you were working with.
Yeah, and that's another good aspect that is really starting to tap into the wellness scores and the session RPEs has been I think pretty eye opening for us, and knowing and I think as much as the technology is so valuable and has taught us so much, as you and maybe I'm saying this because we've had we've been fortunate enough to have this for several years, and we've learned a lot from it. Coming out of it now that we're doing a little bit more subjective measurements, wellness scores and session RPEs, we're starting to see the correlation. And some of that, the session RPEs and the subjective stuff is, I think, as or more valuable than the objective stuff. And there's certainly this bell curve with it, I think anything, and you can go too far on either end of it, but you've got to find that balance between understanding you can't be a slave to the numbers. You use it as information and it's hugely valuable, but at the end of the day, you've got to take it in conjunction with the subjective piece and how these players are responding and feeling.
Oh, 100%. And I think Patrick Ward brought up in his interview like how they found like direct correlations like with certain parameters, and how and Althoff has talked about that, how like how coming into the workout or practice, their mindset, so like how excited they were or happy they were to train,
Yeah.
was like improved their outputs and decreased their RPE, or vice versa. So like if you come in like bummed out and you're like, oh, this workout's gonna suck, then all of a sudden it's like your RP is like a 9, but really like your heart
You're
rate outputs were like 142.
right.
It's like,
Yeah.
which is crazy to me.
I'm really looking forward to going back and starting to really swimming in particular, as we've just kind of started tracking a lot of this stuff and correlating it. Some of the wellness objective pieces, especially the mood state and the stress levels, and really looking at that piece and how that maybe correlates to their soreness and their fatigue. And obviously getting out in front of it and then being able to kind of say, here's where this person is stress-wise, mood-wise, and now let's look at their performance. And yeah, I would not be surprised to see some pretty strong correlations with that stuff.
Yeah, especially with that group.
For sure.
Because, I mean, you already can't be too happy at 5 o'clock in the morning that you have to jump in a box of water.
Yeah, you got to make sure that they don't do that wellness score straight out of bed.
Yeah, no doubt.
Get up, do your routine, get to the pool. As soon as you get to your locker, then go ahead and fill it out.
Yeah.
Give yourself a buffer of about 30 minutes minimum.
No doubt about it. No. But hey, since you touched upon it, let's talk swimming. Because you guys have been doing some big time stuff out there in the water.
Yeah, we're still striving to get to climb the mountain, and yeah, it's been interesting. I got here in 2005. It's amazing to think about how long it's been. Really, my first meeting on my interview was with Coach Arthur Albiero, and we hit it off right away. Yeah, so we're very fortunate. I think we've grown a lot as a program, and we're still, we haven't arrived by any stretch. So we're still fighting to get into that top 10 and now top 5 to really to really continue to realize our goals.
Yeah, so let's talk about all that. So, how are you looking at those numbers? What numbers are you pulling for the swimmers, and how does that impact any decisions outside of the weight room?
Well, I'll start by saying we had a really big hire at the beginning of the summer. We were able to hire a doctor of physical therapy as our new athletic trainer, and so that has really been I think a really big shift in our program, and having that aspect in terms of assessment. And to start with, and really expanding just kind of off of the functional movement screen, which I never really felt like had a huge amount of value for us, somewhat, from a dryland standpoint, but really looking more now specifically at some of the swimming KPIs and looking at really specific joint ranges of motion, which he's been able to add in. So I think that's been one of the things that's been a really big addition for us. And just some of the individualized work and some of the just kind of the shift in the mindset of really blurring the lines between the training room and the weight room. And so, he sees some of our swimmers for treatment in the weight room. It's not kind of here's where you go for your strength and performance work, and here's where you go for your rehab or your treatment. And so that shift has been good. So we're starting to look, we're looking at internal, external range of motion for the shoulder, for the hip, for our breaststroke and IM group, Beighton score for global hypermobility, grip strength that kind of indicates a little bit of posterior rotator cuff stability, and upper body Y balance. So and just kind of breaking up that FMS a little bit, looking at overhead squat, shoulder mobility, active straight leg raise and push up, and kind of taking out a couple of the other ones. I think some of those to kind of group in and really identify the mobility versus stability aspects, and kind of red flag or try to get out in front of some potential issues with some of our swimmers, because you see, body types all across the board. So that piece of it is good. And then I think the wellness piece that we've started to track regularly now has been really eye-opening in a lot of respects, and I think is going to be hugely beneficial going forward as we really try to hone in individually on what we're asking these kids to do throughout the week, and is our organization optimal.
So when you're talking KPIs too, are you looking at physical ones as well, or are you just looking more the therapeutic realm for those things?
Yeah, from the assessment standpoint, really just kind of looking, are they in a healthy range of motion? Are they outside a healthy range of motion, which would indicate, if they don't have the corresponding level of stability, are they at a higher risk? Making the coaches aware of this, making sure that maybe we're adjusting a few things in the weight room in terms of are we asking them to do the right things, maybe not going overhead, shifting hand position, grip position, doing certain things like that to make sure that we're just in the safest positions possible.
No, that's awesome. Because
Yeah.
I think that the one thing that I keep taking away from every person that I talk to when it comes to swimming is that the we can figure out therapeutic like parameters that we can look at, but when it comes to that sport, actual KPIs are very, very hard
Yeah.
to figure out.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
And I don't know if that's like, I don't know if that's ever going to change, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit more about what you're doing with the swim team there, because you guys, I mean, you're talking about like we haven't arrived, but you had some pretty good success, at least over the last, I don't know, let's say like 19 months, going back to trials, a little before trials, and then that meet that was last summer, and then, coming through this year. So let's talk about how that evolution has taken place and what are some things that you're doing that you're seeing you're seeing good success with the swimmers that you're thinking has some pretty good carryover.
Well, I think, number one, I give all the credit to the coaching staff because from a recruiting standpoint and training, they are 24/7, and I always I think obviously I have a degree of influence. I don't know how much it is sometimes, but I know back initially, a big part of what my role was really building and instilling really a new kind of culture and kind of a appreciation for what training outside the weight room could do for what you were going to do inside the pool. And just understanding that the whole objective of what we do outside the weight room is to help them swim faster, and that at the end of the day, if we're not achieving those objectives, then we're not doing the right things. It's not just about a strength coach wanting to get you bigger and stronger and bench press, deadlift, whatever it is. So really improving the team component of it. A lot of our dryland initially years back was just kind of putting them in situations where they had to, number one, be very highly accountable and work together. Different situations where they had to communicate and a lot of it was dryland stuff outside where it was team based and competition based, and just building that competitive mindset was a huge part of it that I think we made huge strides with. Now it's a lot more about taking some of these kids that are coming in at a higher level, especially some of our international kids, integrating them for some of them the first time ever, really being in kind of a team first mentality, not a me first mentality, and integrating them into the system, but then really making sure that we're being a lot more objective with our assessment, and some of these kids that have already had a lot of success at the junior level, how are we maintaining that team identity and that team culture, but yet still individualizing as much as we can. So one of the things that we've kind of evolved with is, when I first got here, I had 8 different team responsibilities in 2 different weight rooms, and we had swimming came in at 1:15 every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and so now we're at the point where we can have 3 to 4 different groups in a day, and we're pretty much Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, depending on the group, and now we've got our sprint group, we've got our super sprint group, we've got our mid distance, we've got our distance, we've got our breaststroke IM group that's doing some specific medicine ball work. So there's a lot of different grouping kind of aspects and individualized aspects that I think we've really expanded over the last few years that I think has probably led to some more success in certain areas.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that when you don't have seven other teams.
Makes a bit of a difference.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe. But let's talk about something. So you talk about the team aspect. You guys had over half a dozen swimmers participate in Rio, but
Yeah.
they were in four different countries, right?
Gosh, I think we had eight and out of and 8 different countries.
Well, there was two Americans, right?
In Rio last summer, we had
Yeah.
one. It was just Kelsey Worrell.
Oh, just Kelsey. Okay.
Right, was in the Olympics. Now, last summer in World Championships, Mallory Comerford as well was on the World Championship team.
Right.
But in Rio, yeah, I believe it was 8 different countries. We had Finland, El Salvador, gosh, if I could remember them all, Brazil, Finland, the Netherlands, the U.S., Venezuela. Hope I'm not leaving anybody out. We had a we had a good group.
Yes. So
Yeah.
how does that dynamic when you're building the team aspect come together?
Well, I think at this point, it's one of those things where I think we're very honest with them up front. They kind of know that, and this is right now. It's kind of almost runs itself, and I think that that's ultimately the point you want to get to is where the culture is such that we can graduate people and get a new class in, and it really doesn't change because the juniors, the sophomores, juniors, seniors are so ingrained in what is expected and what the culture is that they take all these new kids under their wing, and and I think our success, some of it is, we've had certain individuals that are more resistant and more protective and want to make sure that they're doing what they think they need to do. And then some, I think, thrive on it. They come into a team aspect for the first time and they're getting cheered for by their teammates and they're getting encouraged by their teammates and they really thrive off of that. And so one of the things that Arthur really talks about a lot is partnership with us. And so we want to have this mentality of kind of a little bit of give and take and respecting feedback, but within context. And so some of these kids that come in for the first time, and I do kind of point out maybe a little bit the international kids because there's maybe a little bit more flexibility in kind of how we have to handle them. Now, I mean, we don't necessarily bend the rules or anything, but we have to make sure that our communication is good and
Right.
and the expectations are very clear. But I think as long as they understand, hey, at the end of the day, this is a partnership and we're trying to get the best out of you. You have to trust us as much as we trust you, and then that's the main thing.
Yeah, and imagine that. You bring people in and you make sure that they understand that investment in the team is going to lead to a greater outcome for them, and
Hmm.
then they buy into something more. Imagine that whole thought process, actually working.
It's amazing, and sometimes it's brand new to some of these kids, which is
Oh,
amazing.
yeah, 100%. I mean, whenever you deal with European kids, it's funny, because we were joking before with Gina, but like we have a young Dutch lady that's on the team now, and when they come into the weight room, I joke with her. I'm always like, "You always walk to the other side of the room that I'm walking to," and she goes, "Oh, it's coincidence," and I'm like, "I didn't think the Dutch believed in coincidences. I know what's going on. Like, I know it's not me. I know this is just new to you. So
Yeah.
let's try to figure out how we can work together here." And I think that with a lot of them, like they're used to the off season, like that first word being
Hmm.
off,
Hmm.
and there is a culture shock, and that's really cool to me that you guys can bring in, you know, 8 different countries and get these kids to buy into a system and
Yeah.
believe in each other. That's really because I'm sure their training backgrounds are extensively different.
Yeah, yeah, and I think again, from my standpoint, from outside the pool, the assessment is really a huge starting point because it begins that conversation, and they really start to see, okay, this is not about just this is what I'm going to do because I say so. But here are the numbers, and this is what we're seeing could potentially increase your risk of injury, or here's a gap that we need to fill to maximize your performance. This is not about feelings. It's just about this is our data, what our data shows us. Now let's get to work on what can we do outside the pool to supplement what you're doing inside the pool, and then it's a lot simpler of a conversation to have.
100%, man. No, that's awesome. Well, Jason, listen, this is some fantastic stuff. I can't thank you enough for spending the time with us today. This is great. I really appreciate the candidness and the openness to share, and this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, Jay. Likewise, I appreciate all you do and all the information you put out. It's so valuable.
Well, thanks a bunch, man. Well, this will be up real soon. I appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch soon, buddy.
Sounds good. Take care.
You too. And a huge thank you to Louisville's Jason Dierking for taking the time to talk with us today. Guys, fantastic stuff. I mean, just a person sitting there and sharing all the evaluations that they use, why they use them, what they're looking at, and how it drives their training. Fantastic stuff. Cannot thank Jason enough for being so open, honest, and candid with his sharing today. I really do hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, as always, please share it through the social media outlet of your choice. Again, just trying to get great information out to all the great coaches out there. So if you did enjoy the talk, please, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it may be, spread the word, guys. And if you get the opportunity, please leave us a review on iTunes, Podomatic, or YouTube. That would be greatly appreciated. And as always, thank you guys for everything you do for us here at Central Virginia Sport Performance. We will be back next week with another awesome guest. We will see you then.